Welcome to Kinky List, the podcast where we explore the fascinating landscape of human sexuality without judgment, with curiosity, and with the respect this deeply personal topic deserves. I'm your host, Zara Black, and today we're diving into one of the most universal yet rarely discussed aspects of human sexuality: sexual fantasy. You're listening to this right now, maybe while commuting, exercising, or simply relaxing at home, and I want you to know that what we're about to discuss affects virtually everyone. We're talking about something that nearly 100% of men and approximately 90% of women engage in, yet it remains shrouded in mystery, guilt, and misconceptions. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the theater of the mind where our most intimate dramas play out. Let me start with a question that might make you pause. When was the last time you allowed your mind to wander into an intimate scenario that exists only in your imagination? If you're thinking never or feeling uncomfortable, stay with me. If you're thinking this morning, you're in excellent company. Fantasy is deeply rooted in the human psyche, and its impact on both our minds and bodies is profound. From a psychological perspective, fantasy acts as something remarkable. It's a bridge. This bridge connects the untamed primal urges within us to the well-mannered and socialized parts of our identity. Think about that for a moment. We all have this inner landscape where our desires to play, love, rebel, or even experience scenarios without real-world consequences can safely coexist with our moral and social expectations. This isn't just theoretical mumbo-jumbo. When our brains conjure these vivid mental movies, our bodies respond accordingly. Your heart rate can increase, your breathing can change, your skin can flush, all from the power of imagination alone. Some researchers suggest this propensity for fantasy might be linked to hormone levels, particularly testosterone, which might explain some of the statistical differences between genders. But here's where it gets interesting. Under certain conditions, such as stress, some men may scarcely fantasize at all, while some women can achieve orgasms solely through the power of fantasy. The human mind is endlessly fascinating in its diversity. Now let's address the elephant in the room: the myths and misconceptions that surround fantasy. The biggest myth: that fantasy is merely a refuge for people who aren't getting enough real-world sexual satisfaction. Research tells us exactly the opposite. The more sexually experienced and easily aroused individuals are, the more they tend to engage in fantasies. It's not compensation for lack, it's enhancement of abundance. Think of it this way: if you love Italian food, you don't stop dreaming about that perfect pasta dish just because you had a great meal last night. You might even dream about it more because you have the context to truly appreciate what makes it special. I want to take you on a brief journey through time because understanding where we've been helps us appreciate where we are now. Until recently, sexual fantasy was viewed through a lens of skepticism and negativity. Christianity historically considered it sinful. Early modern psychology labeled it a symptom of dissatisfaction, immaturity, or even perversion. Imagine being a therapist in the mid-20th century, sitting across from a patient who confides their intimate fantasies, and your training tells you this is evidence of their psychological deficiency. Picture a wife feeling betrayed because her husband looks at images of women who don't look like her, convinced that if he truly found her attractive, his mind would never wander. Or consider a woman feeling guilty for fantasizing about other men despite having a devoted partner, equating thought with action. I'll be honest with you. Many professionals once shared this narrow perspective, viewing fantasy as merely a neurotic substitute for real satisfaction. It was like watching a foreign film without subtitles. You could see there was something meaningful happening, but the deeper significance remained elusive. But here's the beautiful thing about human understanding: it evolves. Thanks to the groundbreaking work of thinkers like Michel Foucault, Georges Bataille, Robert Stoller, and Michael Bader, our comprehension has transformed dramatically. Today, fantasy is recognized not as a symptom of inadequacy, but as a crucial aspect of healthy adult sexuality. This shift represents more than academic progress, it's liberation. We've moved from viewing fantasies as secret compulsions or perversions to recognizing them as vital components of a well-rounded sexual life. Fantasy is now understood as a valuable and imaginative resource that benefits both individuals and couples. But fantasy's power extends far beyond the sexual realm. Fantasies possess almost magical qualities capable of healing and renewal. They can restore what has been physically lost. Imagine someone visualizing their body as whole after illness, or feeling youthful and embodying traits they may no longer possess. Through fantasy, we can repair, compensate, and transform our realities, even momentarily transcending the limitations that life imposes on us. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of how fantasy actually works in our minds and bodies. Fantasy gives us the extraordinary opportunity to direct our own mental movies, casting ourselves in exhilarating and often unattainable scenarios. Whether it's being adored, dominated, engaging with someone off limits, or performing in daring settings, from bustling city streets to impossible locations, these dreams thrive on their improbability and the comfort that nothing within them needs to come to pass. Here's something that might surprise you. Creativity isn't a prerequisite for engaging in fantasy. If you've ever thought, "I'm just not imaginative enough for this," I'm here to tell you that's not true. These mental narratives often stem from personal experiences, fragments of stories you've encountered, or even reimagined memories. The key is tweaking and reshaping these elements into something that resonates with your desires. Interestingly, research shows that women and men often approach fantasy differently. Women might weave intricate stories with detailed settings, character development, and emotional arcs. Men might envision more isolated scenes with varying partners or situations. Neither approach is better or worse. They're just different expressions of the same fundamental human capacity for erotic imagination. The objective isn't to create the next great American novel in your mind. It's to let the mental film unfurl without judgment or hesitation, relishing the complete control you wield over your fantasy realm. In this space, you are the director, the screenwriter, and the star. You decide who appears, what happens, how it feels, and when it ends. But here's where fantasy becomes particularly ingenious. It's not just random mental wandering. Psychoanalyst Michael Bader describes how the erotic mind creates a psychological safe space where we can undo the inhibitions and fears that plague us in daily life. Within the sanctuary of our erotic minds, fantasies enable us to bypass restrictions imposed by conscience, culture, and self-image. For those who feel insecure about their bodies, fantasies can make them feel irresistible. If someone fears their partner might be emotionally distant, fantasies can transform them into someone who desires them insatiably. People who worry about being too aggressive can feel powerful in their fantasies without fear of harming others. Those unsure about expressing their needs can create scenarios where their desires are understood intuitively. Fantasy becomes a space where fears transform into empowerment, where shame becomes curiosity, timidity becomes assertiveness, and helplessness becomes sovereignty. It's psychological alchemy at its finest. Now, let's tackle one of the most common questions I encounter. should you share your fantasies with your partner? This question has probably crossed your mind, and the answer is beautifully complex. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this perfectly. A couple, let's call them Alex and Jamie, had been together for 2 years. During an intimate conversation, Alex asked Jamie about fantasies. Jamie's immediate response was, "Oh, not really. I'm happy with what we're doing." The conversation died, but Jamie's mind started racing. Was Alex really content with their routine? Did Jamie even have fantasies worth sharing? It wasn't until weeks later that Jamie realized something crucial. Maybe the term fantasy was too intimidating. When Jamie reframed the question as, "What's one thing you're curious about trying?" the floodgates opened. Here's the thing about the word fantasy. Many people perceive it to mean an intricate, detailed scenario involving elaborate role-playing and story arcs that you think about constantly. Picture this. We're in 18th century England. I'm a duchess, you're my husband's attractive butler. He's away collecting taxes when a storm hits. If that's your thing, wonderful. But if it's not, that doesn't mean you lack curiosities or interests. Often, people conflate fantasy with something grandiose and meticulously plotted. But having curiosities, wondering what it would be like to try something new, imagining a different setting, or simply wanting to explore, doesn't require the label of fantasy. Sometimes, the most powerful, intimate discoveries come from the simplest curiosities. So, should you share? It's not obligatory. The key is examining your motivation for keeping things private. If silence stems from guilt or shame, it might be worth exploring those feelings, perhaps with a therapist. Conversely, if a partner shares a fantasy that deeply unsettles you, that needs to be addressed through open, honest dialogue. No one should feel pressured to embrace something that genuinely distresses them. The couples who do share fantasies freely often experience deeper intimacy and communication. For those who are more reserved, there are gentler approaches. Mutual storytelling, creative conversations before intimacy, or simply asking about curiosities rather than full-blown fantasies. Let's explore something fascinating about the nature of fantasy and desire, the role of power. The sexual self has a natural affinity for power, and this attraction has roots that go surprisingly deep. Think about childhood for a moment. Remember being captivated by fireworks? The sudden bursts of bright colors, the billowing smoke, the thunderous noise that made crowds gasp in unison. Children are overtly fascinated by these displays of power, and adults often enjoy fireworks most when experiencing them through a child's eyes. That unfiltered enthusiasm for raw, explosive energy. Eros, our sexual self, operates at the fascinating juncture between safety and adventure. Safety provides the crucial foundation. Without it, sexual experiences can be deeply unsatisfying or even traumatic. But safety alone isn't sufficient for truly fulfilling intimate encounters. Most people crave some element of power dynamics in their intimate moments. This doesn't necessarily mean extreme kink or bondage, though those can certainly be exciting for some. Power play often manifests in much subtler ways, woven into the fabric of satisfying intimacy. Consider something as simple as watching your partner lose composure as they approach climax, the escalation of their breathing, their expressions of pleasure. Witnessing this can create a gratifying sense of connection and, yes, a form of empowerment. Power dynamics appear throughout sexual fantasies. When arousal combines with fantasy, the experience often includes feelings of triumph, control, or surrender, all forms of power exchange. Without fantasy, arousal might yield only physical pleasure. With fantasy, it becomes a rich, multidimensional experience. Nancy Friday's groundbreaking 1973 book, My Secret Garden, provides fascinating insights into women's sexual fantasies, many of which center around various forms of power exchange. Some fantasies overtly showcase themes of dominance or submission, while others integrate power dynamics more subtly. The interplay of power within sexual fantasy reflects something profound about human nature. We're complex beings who need both security and excitement, both tenderness and intensity. Fantasy allows us to explore the full spectrum of these needs safely. In recent years, an interesting development has emerged in sex therapy: the integration of mindfulness with sexual fantasy. This might seem contradictory at first. Mindfulness focuses on present moment awareness, while fantasy seems to be about escaping the present. But the combination is surprisingly powerful. Here's how it works in practice. Participants in mindfulness-based sex therapy programs are encouraged to use sexual fantasy, erotica, or other arousal tools for 5 to 10 minutes, then stop before reaching high arousal or climax. Immediately afterward, they practice a mindfulness exercise focused on observing the physical sensations associated with arousal. This approach serves multiple purposes. First, it helps people identify subtle sexual feelings they might otherwise overlook during intimate encounters. Second, by removing the pressure to reach climax or perform in a particular way, it creates freedom to simply notice and experience sensations. Third, it bridges the mental and physical aspects of sexual excitement. Sexual fantasy, in this context, serves as a method to place your mind in a sexual state during moments when your body might be responding, but your mind is distracted by non-sexual thoughts. Unlike dreams we have while sleeping, fantasies are within our control. We can create or recreate sexual scenarios at will. This requires trust in yourself and willingness to let imagination flow freely. Fantasy is a natural, normal activity, a way to re-experience pleasurable situations and express creativity. However, some people hesitate to fantasize about anyone other than their partner, worried that thinking about something is morally equivalent to doing it. It's important to recognize that fantasy is a natural, healthy expression of sexuality. The power of imagination is fundamental to deriving benefits from fantasy. Some people fantasize about familiar partners in new situations or locations. Others imagine different lovers or even different versions of themselves. The excitement often comes from creating sexual scenarios that may never be acted upon in real life. And that's perfectly okay. Here's something remarkable about human development. Our adult fantasies often have roots in childhood fascinations that have nothing to do with sex. This might sound strange, but bear with me. Children are naturally drawn to displays of power and intensity. They're fascinated by thunderstorms, explosions, loud noises, bright lights, anything that demonstrates forces beyond ordinary experience. This attraction doesn't disappear in adulthood. It transforms and finds new expressions. The sexual self maintains this affinity for power, but in more sophisticated forms. Consider why people are often excited by their partner's intense pleasure. Witnessing someone you care about experience overwhelming sensation, seeing them lose control in a positive way, can create a profound sense of connection and empowerment. This connection between childhood fascination and adult eroticism helps explain why fantasy often involves scenarios that would be impossible or inadvisable in real life. The appeal lies partly in the intensity, the departure from everyday experience, the exploration of power dynamics that wouldn't be appropriate or practical in other contexts. Many sexual fantasies described in research showcase this interplay between different forms of power, sometimes traditionally masculine expressions meeting feminine ones, sometimes role reversals, sometimes entirely novel combinations. The common thread is the creation of scenarios that allow for the experience of intensity within the safe container of imagination. This doesn't mean our fantasies are childish or immature. Rather, they represent a sophisticated evolution of our fundamental human attraction to powerful experiences, channeled through adult understanding and desire. Now we need to address something crucial: the relationship between fantasy and action. This is where many people get confused, worried, or overwhelmed. Here's the fundamental truth: fantasizing about something is not the same as wanting to do it in real life. In fact, the appeal of many fantasies lies precisely in their unattainable or inadvisable nature. The moment we try to make them real, they often lose their power or create complications we hadn't anticipated. Action isn't always the next logical step after fantasizing, though it might seem tempting. Crossing the bridge from fantasy to reality demands careful consideration. Some fantasies are best left in the realm of imagination, where they can provide excitement without consequences. For example, fantasies involving additional participants should be approached with extreme caution. The fantasy of multiple partners might be thrilling in imagination, but the reality involves complex emotions, logistics, and potential relationship complications that most people haven't fully considered. Instead of actually inviting others into your intimate space, you might preserve the fantasy's power by using imagination during intimate moments with your partner. This doesn't mean all fantasies should remain forever in imagination. Some curiosities and interests can be safely explored in reality with proper communication, preparation, and consent from all involved parties. The key is distinguishing between fantasies that enhance your mental and emotional life and those that might translate well into actual experience. The process requires honest self-reflection. Are you drawn to this fantasy because it represents something you genuinely want to experience, or because it provides a safe way to explore feelings and sensations that are better left in imagination? Both purposes are valid, but they lead to different decisions about action. Remember, fantasy serves many purposes beyond just previewing potential real-life experiences. It can be a form of stress relief, emotional processing, creative expression, or simply entertainment for your mind. Not every movie you enjoy watching represents something you want to actually experience, and the same principle applies to the movies playing in your mind. Let's explore something that might surprise you: fantasy as a form of healing and therapy. This isn't about using fantasy to avoid dealing with real-life issues, but rather understanding how our erotic imagination can serve therapeutic functions. In clinical practice, sexual fantasies provide rich insights into individual psychology and relationship dynamics. Their ingenious ways our creative minds navigate and resolve conflicts around desire and intimacy. Think of fantasy as your psyche's own therapy session, working through complex emotions and needs in a safe, private space. Fantasy can serve as a form of emotional regulation. For people dealing with stress, anxiety, or depression, erotic fantasy can provide moments of pleasure, excitement, and positive feeling that might be otherwise difficult to access. It's a form of self-care that costs nothing and requires only imagination. The therapeutic power extends beyond individual psychology. Fantasy can help people work through sexual shame, explore aspects of their identity, or process past experiences in a controlled environment. Someone who feels powerless in daily life might explore scenarios of control and dominance in fantasy. Someone who carries too much responsibility might explore surrender and being cared for. Fantasy can also serve a reparative function. People who have experienced trauma, illness, or loss sometimes use erotic imagination to reclaim aspects of themselves or their experiences. This isn't denial or avoidance, it's a form of psychological resilience and healing. For couples, sharing appropriate fantasies can deepen intimacy and understanding. When partners feel safe enough to reveal their inner landscape, it creates opportunities for connection that go beyond physical intimacy. It's a form of emotional nakedness that can be even more vulnerable than physical nakedness. However, it's important to note that while fantasy can be therapeutic, it's not a substitute for professional therapy when dealing with serious trauma, mental health issues, or relationship problems. Think of fantasy as one tool in a larger toolkit of emotional and sexual wellness. Our fantasies don't exist in a vacuum. They're shaped by a complex interplay between our unique personal histories and broader cultural influences. This intersection of individual and collective imagination is fascinating to explore. Different cultures provide cues about what's considered sexually appealing and what's forbidden or taboo. These cultural touchstones, whether they're celebrities, fictional characters, or even controversial figures, can appear in our fantasies not necessarily because we're personally attracted to them, but because they represent certain qualities or scenarios that our minds find useful for creating arousal. Fantasy bridges the gap between what's possible and what's permitted in our real lives. It's a form of psychological alchemy that transforms various elements, memories, desires, cultural images, personal needs, into the experience of erotic arousal. Understanding this cultural dimension can help reduce shame about fantasy content. Sometimes people worry about the meaning of their fantasies, particularly if they involve scenarios, people, or activities that seem inconsistent with their conscious values or identity. But fantasies often use symbolic elements that represent deeper psychological needs rather than literal desires. For instance, someone might have fantasies involving a celebrity they don't even particularly like in real life, because that celebrity represents certain qualities, confidence, power, unavailability, that create useful psychological conditions for arousal. The fantasy isn't really about the celebrity, it's about what they represent in the person's inner world. This symbolic nature of fantasy means that content doesn't necessarily correlate with real-life desires or values. Someone might have dominant fantasies while preferring equality in real relationships, or submissive fantasies while being assertive in daily life. Fantasy provides a space to explore the full range of human experience without real-world implications. Recognizing the cultural and symbolic dimensions of fantasy can free us from overanalyzing or judging our erotic imagination. Instead, we can appreciate fantasy as a creative, natural expression of our complex inner lives. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the secret world of sexual fantasy. Fantasy is a uniquely human gift, a private theater where we can explore desire safely. Whether your imagination is lush or spare, approach it with curiosity and kindness, not judgment. If you're in a relationship, sharing is optional. If shame holds you back, ask whether it's serving you. Curious how fantasy can actually heal, deepen connection, and reshape intimacy. In the full episode, we reveal surprising stories, expert insights, and practical tips, plus guest moments that stayed too raw for the edit. Download the Skoob app now to get access to the full story and exclusive episode extras. This has been Intimate Minds. Subscribe, share, and be kind to your curious mind.